What's up, my Yugi Bros? I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0, and what you are about to see is part 2 of the in-depth profile of the Zoodiac deck that Simo and I took to Seattle. Part 1 is on his channel. You can check out the link in the description below to see part 1 of the deck profile. Remember, this is part 2. I know it's huge, but this was a really in-depth choice for us, and we spent hours on absolutely every card that we chose for this deck. So I would highly encourage you to check out the rest of this profile and then watch this part. But without further ado, here is my part of the profile.
All right. So of course we have Norden because we have Instant Fusion. So I'm not even going to bother with that. Invoker because you have Terror Top. Totem Bird came in clutch so many times. There were actually a couple of players who I saw not running it. Which I can't imagine.
Really?
Yeah, there were a couple of players preparing for this event who were talking about how they were planning on cutting Totem Bird. I cannot imagine it. This card was amazing in the Noid matchup because we opened with this and they kept my Noid matchup round 3 kept trying to bait this out so that he could use Imagination or another card like that. They could use Monster Gate, and I just would have none of it.
Yep.
Because as long as you had Totem Bird, like, you had control of the field.
It's such a good defensive card. Like, it's amazing. I can't believe you said that you ran into people that weren't running this.
I couldn't either. And the other thing that's interesting about our threes that we might want to talk about is the fact we don't run Breaksword. It just never came up. It never came up in testing. It never came up at the event. It doesn't do anything that the rest of the deck can't. And so if there are things that are going to be threats to the rest of your deck, Breaksword isn't going to take care of them. So we wanted more space in our extra. Next, we ran 2 Boar for our entire Zoo lineup. The Boar is, I mentioned that because it is unusual for people to be playing 2 Boar. I've seen people deliberating about it. I'm so glad we played 2 Boar.
I am as well.
In testing, we found that we were getting really paranoid about making our combo because we had 1 Boar in the grave, and if we lost out on our mortar or something, the combo is over. Or we would be antsy about playing the Boar to make the combo in the first place. But with 2 Boar, we had no problems. We could shuffle Tiger Mortar with Emerald during the end phase, or once we were done with the combo. And instead of Boarbow, because Tiger Mortar is just a better card. Tiger Mortar is useful for things, whereas Boarbow is just, Xyz material. And so running the 2 Boarbow gave us a lot of freedom. It meant that we could do more in the late game, because if we had a Boarbow that we hadn't used yet, we could put that under a Bull and be able to get, multiple like a search and then Dried It and then have a material for Dried It during the next turn. It was just way better than any card that we could think of in the extra deck that we could add on.
Boarbow is actually our 14th extra deck card because essentially when we broke it down, and we'll get into the rest of the extra deck, but we had 13 cards that were like, these are for sure we're playing, and we had 2 extra slots. And as we were testing, we were trying to see like what came up that we needed to run, and Boarbow was the 14th because we're like, we have so much more freedom if we have a second Boarbow.
Yep.
Most players just play 1 and they're forced to recycle it back with that Emerald or with combo or whatever, but the fact that we had 2, I'm so happy we played it. That was so nice.
And I almost won a game once just by attacking directly with Boarbow, which was the only card I had left in the extra deck. The only problem was that he drew D-Barrier off of Emerald. Anyway, speaking of Emerald, we run 2. You have to. We're running if you're not running like the Metal Foes build or something like that, you have to be running 2 Emerald because it's everything to the combo.
Yep. Infinite Emerald, if you even need to do that.
And finally, for our last 2 rank 4s, or our last 2 extra deck cards in general, we had Gagaga Samurai, which is basically mandatory.
Yeah.
If you're running a pure Kaiju build, you have to be running this because there are just so many OTKs with this card. The ways to win with this card are just like phenomenal. And finally, our 15th extra deck card, kind of a last minute choice. This was basically the last thing that we decided on last night, or the night before the tournament, before we went to bed. Steel Swarm Roach. This card, because we knew going into this that Noids were going to be our worst matchup. And with the 15th extra deck card, we knew that we had to have something that the rest of our extra deck could not do. We originally had Abyss Dweller and Castel. Castell just did basically exactly the same thing as Dryden, so we took that out. And the Abyss Dweller, we just could not think of the matchups that we couldn't deal with that Abyss Dweller took care of. Because,
maybe like Yang Zing. That's like
it came up for me against Yang Zing, but I still was just fine against Yang Zing when I played it. But the one matchup that we just had nothing that could play defensively against, especially in the extra deck, the one thing that we really needed to be playing as hard as we could for was Noids. And I blew out my Noid matchup because I saw that, I lost the die roll in my first Noid matchup of the two that I played against. And I saw that he played, I don't remember, but he got like one Noid in the grave, and I went off on the combo and I just summoned Steel Swarm Roach and he scooped. Because if you have this in front of back row, there is nothing they can do about it unless they have like, Harmadic or something like that. If they have Harmadic, then like you'll just pop it with Dryden. But with Roach on the board, they cannot summon the most important monsters in their deck, which are Deviati and Onungu.
Yeah.
They can't summon those cards, and those are the biggest problem for the deck.
Saitsumas too.
Yeah, Saitsumas. It was a really big one for me, actually, in my last Noid matchup. But this was just absolutely phenomenal against the Noid matchup. And actually, you told me, Simo, that Billy Brake told you that like the fact that you made Roach made that last game a lot tougher.
Yeah, so that was actually the only time I played Roach the entire tournament because I played only one other Noid Zoodiac the entire tournament, and I didn't even need to make Roach because of the way the board was. So what you're supposed to do is with Roach, in theory, is that you do the Zoo combo, and you guys saw me do this on stream if you watched it. You do the Zoo combo, but rather than making Emerald, you make this, because the theory is it's very hard for Noid Zoo to out this Dryden and at least like one or two back row, because they need a very particular hand to be able to out that. They need like 4 exact cards to do it. It's so hard. So that's why you guys saw me do it. And like I saw people like in the comments afterwards of like Facebook and stuff were like, Roach! Because it's like,
so hyped to see
because
it.
I didn't side deck Roach in. We had it in the extra the whole time. So like, so like Billy was saying like to me after the match, he's like, dude, that Roach made the entire match like so hard. So it's because Noids is your worst matchup. Roach is just so key, just being able to lock out the fact that they can't summon anything.
Yep.
And the back row that this deck has, combined with like side deck and stuff too. Like when you get into the side with Roach as well, Roach just gets nasty. So there was no other card we could think of that was better in a 15th deck slot or extra deck slot than this card. And paid off for Robert. It ultimately didn't pay off for me in the end, but I'm so glad I ran it because it was
if he didn't have the Dogoran, like Roach would have blown out the game.
Basically, yeah. So, but I mean, that's just how it goes. So, I mean, technically, if you're wanting to play this deck, this can be like your free slot to kind of like interchange something out, as well as like the second Borbo if you really want to.
All right.
So let's move
on.
Are we going
on to the side deck?
Yeah, we're gonna
do this.
This is gonna be, since it's your half of the video.
All right. So the going into the side deck was a really big set of choices for us because.
Remember the big deck of cards?
He has just this box of cards that was things that we were considering for the side deck, and it was almost individual cards, and you could like barely fit it in there just because the side deck was so important for us going in today. And basically what we really needed to do with our side deck was be able to defend against our worst matchups and also be versatile enough to face up to the fact that this is an extremely diverse format. I mean, aside from the fact that basically everybody's running Zoodiac with something, everybody's running Zoodiac with something. And so playing the side deck to recognize the fact that it's a very diverse format and that we do have some very difficult matchups was really important. So our very first thing...
No surprise.
Was against the Noid matchup, because this was obviously our hardest one. We had Artifact Lancia, which was huge in my Noid matchup. It kept me from losing under grass because they can't use snow under it. They can't summon their Noids, and if you can keep their Noids off the board for a turn, you can make Roach, and then you've got the game.
Yeah, you even saw it because you were watching my Noid match. When I was playing in Swiss, and you saw, like, I just dropped Lancia. Like,
and the game was over.
The game was over. Yeah. He had no play. Yeah.
Exactly.
The fact that this stops snow is also really important.
It
is. As much, almost more important that it stops snow than the actual Noids themselves.
Yep.
In some cases.
And then I think, actually, it may be prudent to go on to the Kaiju engine, because we did run the full Kaiju engine in the side, which was also part of our plan for the Noid matchup. So this was a little different between me and Simo. Simo was running the Dogoron. I was running Sticky String Kaiju.
Which we actually found one instance where Kumungus was actually better than Dogoron.
Yeah, but then there was a 2% chance that I drew into both of these. And if you draw into both of these and you don't have Dogoron in the deck, you can't do the OTK. But it was a 2% chance, so that's 2 out of 100 games that I would have gotten these two, and like with the Slumber, it's an even lower chance. So I decided to run Kumungus because I'd rather search for Kumungus than search for Dogoron.
Yep.
Honestly.
And what we found out with Kumungus is if you give your opponent a Kumungus and they Vanity's Emptiness you actually live for one more turn than you would with Dogoron, because Sticky String's only 2,400 with Dogoron's 3,000.
Yep.
3 times 24 is 72. 3 times 3,000 is 9k. So.
Yep.
If assuming you're on full life, so that's just a very minor instance. But ultimately, as long as you're running like these 3, and then like that can be like Dogoron or Sticky String. Like, it honestly, that's such a rare thing to come up.
Yep.
We found out it came up.
Yeah, it actually the opposite came up in the feature match between Squiddy and Asala drew into the Thunder King and the Jizukiro. So it was good that he had the Dogoron in his deck.
Yeah.
But other than that, it just does not come up. And of course, we had the 3 Slumber. This card's nutty.
This card's insane.
It's so good.
This is why we played My Body.
Yep, it was because of this card. And the thing is, like, if you have this and you have emptiness, like, you win the game.
Yeah, so kind of to reiterate what we were saying at the beginning of this video is that because of the way our deck's designed, we actually don't side anything for the mirror.
That's true.
Our deck is so good with the main deck that we don't side anything. We pretended like we sided stuff.
Yep.
But we actually didn't side anything. We just shuffled our side deck into the main and took out the same side deck card. Because, so what's cool about that is that we were that confident in this build that we didn't need to side anything. And so then going second, you know, you have this whole engine. You only need to play this engine one game.
Yep.
Because you're not, either you're going to win your first match, you're going to go second game 2, and then you have this.
Yep.
And then you're going to lose your first match, go first, and then if you win that, you have to go to game 3, and then you're going to go second, and you play this again.
Yep.
So we just pretty much turned the whole theory of playing more games with your side deck than your main completely on its head, which I think is part of the reason why the deck did as well as it did, is because we weren't relying on the side deck as much. So I mean that's an argument to be made either way. And
these were also huge for the very difficult matchups. This was big for the Noids. We always sided these in for Noids because you have to be able to take out that Debiati or Ninku.
Yep.
And that came up for me in my Noid matchup. It was big for, it's good for taking out Toad.
We side all 10 of these going second against Noids.
So,
it was ridiculous.
It was absolutely
It was hard to figure out what to side out for that, but we did it.
So our next side deck choice was actually also basically for the Noid matchup and like Blue Eyes. But we decided once again, since our Noid matchup is so difficult, that what we needed to stop was their having resources. And the cards that give them resources are all spells. So we ran the 3 anti-spell fragrance, which for me never came up because I could never draw the darn thing.
And for me, all 3 came up in the feature match with Billy, but you know, it's fine.
But theoretically, if you open with this, and your opponent opens with something with, you know, their spells, then you can just flip up the anti-spell fragrance and you win the game because they can't do the things that Noids need to do most, which is, you know, use grass, use left arm offering, use monster gate, use imagination, vanishment, things like that. Those are all cards that you need to be able to play on your first turn in order to get ahead with the Noid matchup. So if we could draw into this early in the game, then we were set for the rest of the game.
Yep. And this was also for Metal Foes as well. I don't think you played a single Metal Zoo matchup.
I did not play a single Metal Zoo matchup.
I played one and I sided it. I didn't see it, but it's also for Metal Foes just because, you know, that's a very common matchup and that pretty much just blows them out as well. So, yeah, I was very happy with this. I felt that because, like, a lot of people were going to probably play, like, Metal Zoo or something, which there was a lot of people playing Metal Zoo, but... I mean, this card was great, except, you know, in my last round. But other than that, I saw too many of them in my last round.
That's definitely true. And it was also good because if they were running the Kaiju, they couldn't slumber under this.
Yes.
Which was really huge. I mean, they could, but they'd have to wait for a turn. And if you're waiting for a turn to blow to wipe Zoodiac player's board, then you're done. You're done. The game is over. You can't come back from a Zoodiac player getting the combo twice in a row.
It's true.
You can't.
It's very slim that'll happen.
And so that's what we ran that for. It didn't come up the way that we wanted it to. I probably still wouldn't cut it.
Honestly. I wouldn't either. I was happy with it. Solely for Noids.
Actually, you did have a Noid matchup where this did blow out the game.
Oh, that's true.
You did win a matchup.
That's right.
Of this
so
card.
my other Noid matchup that wasn't Billy, I think that was round 7.
Yep.
So what happened is that he set like his 3 spells because I flipped this on turn 1. He set Void Vanishment and then activated it on his next turn. He used it to search out Void Imagination. He tried activating it, and I just pointed at Anti-Spell. He couldn't because he had to set it for a turn, and he's like, "Oh, okay, I just scooped then." Because like you he just had nothing else to do. He had no plays.
And so this just blows them out. If they can't get their spells, they can't get plays.
Yeah. And so last but not least, our last 2 side deck cards.
Our final problem that we ran into was that there were 2 decks that we had nothing good against. And those decks are Paleozoic and Barrier Statues. We were just thinking, we spent a lot of time on the last night before the event deliberating as to what we were going to do about Barrier Statues.
Well, first we thought if we could side 2 cards for Zoo going first.
Yeah, that was the thing we were thinking about, but there were 2 matchups. Those 2 matchups we just had nothing for. And our main deck was so good against the Zoo deck that we were just like, let's just not side. Let's not side for the Zoo matchup, except for going second. So we had to think about barriers because there's nothing you can do about Barrier Statues with this main deck, and with the rest of our side deck, there really isn't anything. And it's a really tough matchup, famously, for Zoodiac players, especially since they run things like Lance, and now that they're running the what's it called, the Phantom Knight cards. There's just so little that the deck can do against it, and I knew that there were going to be some players playing that today, but there's one card that they just cannot do anything against. And that's Denko Sekka. We sided Denko Sekka in Zoodiac, and I'm really happy we did that. It never came up. For me. I don't know if I don't remember it coming up for you, but like I never had a position to play it, but I was so happy that I had this in the side deck because I was worrying so much about Barrier Statues. If you just normal summon this against Barrier Statues, they have nothing. They have nothing
unless
that can
they
get Denko.
have Moon Mirror or preemptively sorted a Barrier Statue.
And
that is it.
Which
they don't do.
We were on Twin Twister, so even Moon Mirror Shield wouldn't have been that big of an issue. But like if you just normal summon that, it's done. You could just start swinging over this.
This plus Barrage is pretty much like, we were just like, okay, if we get that, like, we're fine. We're done. We have so much good, strong back row that Denko's pretty much going to do everything that we needed it to do. So, it never came up, thankfully.
Yes.
It was pretty much just a contingency plan in case. Although I played 3 decks it mattered against.
Yeah.
So I didn't actually saw it once, but like other than that, like it didn't come up for the most part. But it was, we didn't want to get blown out by those types of decks. We didn't play any Paleo. Paleo was pretty likely we were going to play, but we didn't, luckily.
Yeah.
But Barrier Statues was kind of like for the trolls that were there. That like we needed something for that because it's a YCS. Zoo's only been out for 2 weeks technically.
Yep.
So So that's the whole deck. So
that's the entire deck. I loved this deck. I can't think of anything in it that I would have changed.
Yeah.
I would have changed. There were a couple of plays that I made because I just don't think clearly at events. But there were a couple of changes I would have made to my playing. But there's nothing I can think of changing in this deck.
Yeah.
We tested this out, and there were problems that came up, but there are things that are going to come up in any tournament. There are things that you're going to run into. With just lucky plays. I got blown out by DD Crow a couple of times, but there's really in the mirror match there's really nothing you can do about that. And DD Crow is really good for the mirror, but our main deck we could win the mirror anyway. And the thing about DD Crow is it's a win more card. It is the definition of a win more card, because if you can't deal with your opponent's board against Zoodiac, DD Crow isn't going to do you any good, because the thing is Zoodiac can play under Crow. If you've had your Rat Crowd, I had it a couple times and I just blew out my opponent anyway because you still have combos in the deck. And so we didn't like Crow for that reason. There were a couple of players running Lullaby of Obedience, which I mean, I lost to Lullaby of Obedience. So I might have played that, but I just, like, once again, I feel like our main deck and side deck are just so solidly chosen for this event.
We also considered third Twin Twister at one point instead of this Denko, and what was the other card we were going to do?
Third Ghost Ogre.
Third Ghost Ogre, yeah, that was what these were before Denkos, but I think ultimately Denko was the better option. Twin Twister probably would have come up more considering what we know now,
Yeah.
but this just blows out the matchups that we needed it to.
Absolutely. And so I mean, if pre-Invoker or Invoked, I think that this is the best build of the deck. Personally, I mean, we're going to be seeing people who topped and we didn't.
Yep.
But I personally think that what we put together here was absolutely optimal for the deck.
As the meta currently stands. Yes, I would agree.
you know, Invoked is going to change everything. I think that deck is going to create a very tough matchup. But for now, if you're going into UDS, I mean, if I were playing at UDS, I wouldn't change this build at all. And so that's what we have for you today. I hope you all liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. Of course, subscribe for more decks, discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. And since you are now on my channel from Simo's channel, I'm certain you've heard of the guy, but if you haven't already, you should subscribe to him. I've had a great weekend with you, man, Simo. It's been just so much fun.
It's been an absolute pleasure, my friend.
And just what a way to end the weekend. So I'll see you all later, and we got a jet.